You can find more about New Mexico open primaries and the two major parties' stances on our website, newmexicoinfocus.org. Welcome to the Line Opinion Panel. Joining me tonight at the table to voice their opinions about open primaries and other topics are Daniel Foley, former New Mexico House Minority Whip. Mark Boitano, a former New Mexico State Senator, is here. The Executive Director of Common Cause New Mexico, Vicki Harrison, is with us. And Martha Burke, a political psychologist, women's issues expert, and author of Your Voice, Your Vote, The Savvy Woman's Guide to Power, Politics, and the Change We Need, now out in a new edition. Now, welcome to all of you. Now, a proposed constitutional amendment to allow all registered voters to vote in a major party primary election is making some headway, advancing through one House committee and now on to another. And Daniel, we just heard Bob Perls. He's been around town here for a long time, but now he's back, obviously. And his new effort about having open primaries, simple question, is this a solution for the ills that bedevil us right now? Not even close, really.
First of all, it's got no chance of passing.
Well, forget that. Just the reasons why.
Well, the reasons why is it's not the ills to the process at all whatsoever. You know, you look at the legislature the way it's made up right now. You've got a total of 25 seats that are competitive out of 112. The Democrats did a great job in the last 50 years in redistricting. There's 25 seats that are competitive. Do you think anybody's going to say the way to solve these problems is, because when you say there's only 25 seats competitive, that means the remainder of the legislators are only vulnerable in a primary, period. That's it. And so at the end of the day, you know, I think it highlights that there's a redistricting problem, right? Because you only have 25 of 112 seats.
And that's even generous, actually.
But at the end of the day, saying the answer is going to be, you know, we're going to allow anybody to run in because we decide, look, right now, if you had open primaries, do you think the Republicans would be running out to vote for Bernie Sanders because they really think Bernie Sanders is the best presidential candidate on the ticket? That's not what it's about. The primaries are about the people in those caucuses selecting the people that best represent their views to go forth to the general election.
I respect your point of view. You're a political elected person. I appreciate that. But Vicki Harrison, you're not. And and I ask the same question. Is this not what Bob Perls was getting at fundamentally? Two things: increasing voter participation and eventually a different kind of candidate who would be find that appealing, to talk to lots of disparate people to get one to buy into their message. Does that make sense to you?
It makes total sense to us. And obviously, Common Cause New Mexico has supported open primaries for several years now. And we've had people from both sides of the aisle carry it. Andy Nunez carried an open primaries bill a couple of years ago. And, you know, so I think that there is support. You know, we've got 22% of the state that is independent, DTS, declined to state, and I think it's really important that they have a voice in primaries. But at the same time, Dan is also correct. You know, we don't have a ballot initiative process in New Mexico. We have to get through the legislature to get to the ballot. And in order to get through the legislature, you have to get through the parties. We don't have independents, DTSs, Greens, and Libertarians in Santa Fe. We have Republicans and Democrats. And it's going to be difficult to get through there. I'm thrilled we got through a committee already last weekend. And I think that there is a lot of support for it. And we need to look at that. And we need to look at, but one of the reasons that people don't want to pass it is exactly the reason Bob talks about why we should pass it. Because then we get more people in the middle. We get more people that are truly representing everybody.
And their influence on
and
people.
Redistricting.
Right.
I mean, I think 25%, 25 races is very generous. I think there's way less competition. And both parties, the last two times around, have cost us a lot of money in court fees and lawyers' fees to get redistricting. So let's do that independently.
That's a whole other cut of meat, as they say over there. But that's okay. It is tied together.
It is.
Interestingly, Senator, that Vicki mentions that did pass that committee with a Republican vote, actually, as a tiebreaker. That was kind of interesting. As an ex-elected official, though, I'm curious where you're coming at this one, like Dan. Is it a problem that this solution is not the right solution, or is the problem just we need better candidates out there to enthuse people? What's your point of view on that?
Well, first of all, I get it that you know, the number of independents is increasing. When I ran for office, I think 6–7% of my district were independents. Now it's 19–20%. I get it that political party popularity is on the decline. I don't think this is the right fix, though. I think what we're seeing in the presidential election right now is a good example that if we have good candidates that give voice to a group of people, they buy into the two-party system, and there's value in the two-party system. So we have somebody like Bernie Sanders, who, you know, he's been all over the place, independent, socialist, whatever. He decides to buy into the two-party system, run as a Democrat, bingo, he's raising money, he's got votes, and we're increasing voter turnout too. In Iowa, voter turnout's up 50% this year versus the last caucus 4 years ago. So we're doing a number of things. We're giving voice to independents who are supporting Bernie. We're increasing voter turnout, and we're also showing that the two-party system has value, because we need to assimilate as a culture, and the two-party system allows us to assimilate, allows us to coalesce. So I don't think the problem's the system. I think the problem is the quality of candidates.
Martha Burke, just off the road from Iowa. Speaking of Iowa, these guys brought it up. Glad you're none the worse for wear, as they say, from the experience. I hear that these guys' point, absolutely, a lot of folks would agree with them, but where Bob was trying to get at is, look, let's flip the lens around and look at the voter instead of the candidate. Your sense of that, does this help enthuse people to have an open primary system?
I think it does. Yeah. The caucus system in Iowa is essentially an open primary. First of all, though, to address Bob's first point, which was if the government's paying for an election, everyone should be able to vote. The Iowa caucuses are 100% financed by the parties. So the government money does not go into it. Now, having said... Let me
cut you off there for a quick second.
Yeah.
Does that drill down also to the local level?
Yes.
Because a lot of folks feel like the primaries are essentially closed because they're being paid for by the parties, so to speak.
They are. And, but anyone, and I saw it, I was an observer at one of the caucuses, anyone who is a legal resident over 18 in Iowa and lives in the precinct can walk up and register that minute on their way into the caucus.
Wow.
Now, they have to register as a Democrat or Republican, depending on which caucus they have chosen, but if they change their mind later for the general election or next year's caucus on something else, they can change right there at the door.
Interesting.
I think it does get more people in, and speaking of Bernie, the caucus I observed was full of first-time caucus goers. They took a show of hands. I would say fully 60% of the Bernie folks were first-time caucus goers. So it does get people in. Now, the candidate himself, of course, is pulling a lot of younger folks in just on his own platform and whatever. But the fact that they could walk up and register, and I saw a lot of that going on, was definitely an incentive.
Let me ask you a question on Mark's point. Does this idea of Bob's not dilute the parties in some manner? Does it make the parties less relevant or less powerful, less influential? Just something drops in your view?
Yeah,
Is that
I think
a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it depends on whether independents reach a critical mass. But I've done some looking at that for my book, and here's something interesting. People are moving away from both parties in terms of what they're declaring. But women are moving away faster than men, which is interesting. They're both moving to the independent column, though. So at some point, like right now, Bloomberg is sort of toying with the idea of getting in. I guess he would do it as an independent. There was a lot of talk in Iowa that given the dynamic on both sides, the Republican and the Democratic side, they saw it as a precursor to the dominance of the two parties really waning.
Interesting there. Daniel, back to you. You started this off quite crisply. I appreciate that. The parties, same question. Are the parties have to evolve at some point? Does this dilute the parties or just redirect the parties in some way to accommodate other people who want to be in the process?
That's a great question. I don't think it dilutes the parties. First of all, I believe that in the last 15 years, the parties have become less and less effective and less of a major player. With all the campaign finance rules and what the parties can give money to, they're becoming less and less of an impact player. I would agree with a lot of what was said at the table today. But if you look at what's happening today, to Mark's point, you got Bernie Sanders, who's been an independent and a Democrat, and here he either loses barely or almost beats Hillary Clinton. You've got Donald Trump, who's I mean, used to be a Democrat, was an independent, I mean, I don't know what he was, and now he's leading the Republican side. You got all of these folks, you look at the Republican ticket with, you know, you got 2 Hispanics, an African American, an Anglo. I mean, you got a woman in the race. I mean, there is an unbelievable amount of diversity like you've never seen before in the elections right now, and most importantly, especially on the Republican side, because I know it's a shock to you, and I don't attend a lot of Democrat meetings, but on the Republican side, the diversity that we have that's running for this deal. In Iowa, if I remember correctly, Donald Trump, who came in second place, had more votes than any Republican that's ever won the caucus there. There were 180,000 people. It was up, they thought it was going to be a record at 140,000. They were at 180,000. So I think the argument about, you know, people aren't energized or going to this open primary, I don't believe that that's the answer, because at the end of the day, I think it's going to make people feel less involved. I think it's going to make people feel like their voice is diluted by people who really aren't paying attention. And I think the scary part is you have to be careful what you wish for. I believe, my opinion, you start doing these open primaries, you're putting a lot of power in political operatives' hands that can figure out how to game the system. And right now, it's a lot different than that.
You can game the system now, though, if you want to, can't you?
Gene, yes.
Right.
May I just
Please.
address that briefly? I actually was staying with an ex-Secretary of State in Iowa this last week, and I asked her specifically, what about the people that come in, they hate Trump, so they go vote in the Republican primary, but they're really Democrats, or the other side, they want Bernie to get the nomination so they can beat him in the general, and do they come back and re-register as the other party? Because that's always one of the big objections to this kind of system. And she said it probably happens occasionally, but in the years I was Secretary of State, it was never an issue. She said it's a lot of trouble to change your registration, change it back, and so forth. And it's not something people do casually. And if it was done on much of a mass scale, she felt like it would become a scandal and would be out there, and they just don't see it there.
Let's see where this goes, please.
I think that's it. You know, I've heard that argument that, you know, people are going to change parties, which they can do now already in New Mexico. And I just think, man, we can't even get people out to vote. We're really going to have roving bands of Republicans or Democrats trying to throw. I just don't see it happening, especially when it can already happen right now.
That's right.
And I mean, you know, people say that with any issue we work on is people will find a way around it. And, you know, that says more about their character than about the reforms we need.
There you go. Good point right there. Up next, we go to Santa Fe for a look at proposals to increase accountability and oversight for campaign finance reporting.